สวัสดีครับท่านผู้ชมผมพีทนะครับวันนี้กีตาร์ไทย International นะครับมีโอกาสพิเศษสุดๆครับผมเชื่อว่ามือกีตาร์ในบ้านเราหลายๆคนนะครับยิ่งเป็นสายแจ๊สฟิวชั่นสายแจ๊สเนี่ยรอที่จะได้มาพูดคุยกับคุณมือกีตาร์ท่านนี้จากอังกฤษมานานมากแล้วนะครับเพื่อไม่ให้เป็นการเสียเวลานะครับขอเชิญทุกท่านพบกับคุณทอม Quayle ครับ Hello Tom.
Hello.
Nice to have you here in Thailand.
Thank you. Really nice to be here. My first time, so very exciting.
All right, you came here for a clinic, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, and could you tell us about your music background? How did you start playing guitar?
Yeah, I have to tell everybody this story because I owe this kind of career and music to my dad, which is possibly not a cliche. A lot of people pick up a guitar or any kind of musical instrument because of a hero of theirs. Now, it would be a little bit too cheesy to say, my dad is my hero, but he is in a way. But my dad is a phenomenal, really, really talented fingerstyle guitarist. Plays Tommy Emmanuel stuff, Doyle Dykes, Leo Kottke, just really, really, really amazing guitar player. And since, I can remember, there's always been incredible guitar playing in my house. So when I was about 15, I, at that point, had kind of fiddled with guitars, just had them on my knee and kind of fiddled with them. But for some reason, I must have expressed an interest. My dad bought me a guitar and a copy of, do you have Guitar Techniques magazine over here?
Yeah.
You do? It's all over the world. It's incredible. Yeah. So a copy of Guitar Techniques magazine, and it was one of the first issues that had the CD on.
Yeah.
And there was like A to Z of Great Riffs was Metallica, I think it was. And there was some Steve Vai stuff in there. And my mind was just completely blown because I'd never really heard guitar playing like this before. I'd heard acoustic guitar playing, super high level.
Okay.
And some of my dad's kind of old folk records and blues records and that kind of thing. This just blew my mind, this kind of virtuosic shred guitar. So that was how I got into it, and it kind of stuck ever since then. It's just been an obsession of mine since then. So I owe it to my dad.
Okay. And how did you learn guitar? Self-taught or your dad teach you?
No, as much as I love my dad, not the kind of he doesn't teach guitar in a way that's kind of going to help you get better. And it's not his failing at all. He just gets very frustrated when people can't do things as quickly as he can. And also as a fingerstyle guitarist, he's not really a theoretical guitar player, not much of an improviser, but man, you want to hear him play. He's just incredible, really amazing. He has a YouTube channel.
Is he on YouTube? Right. So what is his name?
He's called Richard Quayle.
Okay.
So if you type in Richard Quayle guitar, you'll find there's like 50 videos.
Okay. I will check it out.
Fingerstyle guitar, awesome. So so I kind of just did the thing that a lot of guitar players of my generation did. Buying guitar magazines. YouTube didn't exist, obviously, so buying guitar magazines, buying transcription and tab books for your favourite albums. So Passion and Warfare, I was a big shredder at the time. All the Dream Theater albums. I would have every birthday and Christmas, I would get 2 or 3 albums plus the books, and I would just go through them.
Okay.
And that would be kind of, my lessons. And then when I was 17, I decided I wanted to do this seriously. And my parents very rightly said, well, you need to study properly then.
Yeah.
So I had a guitar teacher for a year, and he took me through, we have this thing in the UK called grades, where you do theory grades and playing grades. And I didn't do the playing grades, but I did the theory grades to get in.
You have an exam.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah, so and you get a certification.
Exactly, so you do 8 of these things.
Okay.
And I did all 8 in a year, and I think I failed the last one, just because it was too fast, everything was too, crammed in too quickly.
Yeah.
But it didn't matter, I got into jazz college because of that, and then after that, my study became much more kind of official or formal, if you like, and I did a jazz degree for 3 years, and that was it, basically.
So at that time, you study all those standard jazz and the fundamental jazz, right? So that's why it make you become Tom Quayle this day. Fusion jazz.
Yeah, it's a funny thing because I became a real serious jazz head. I hated everything if it wasn't jazz. These days, I very rarely get to play jazz at all.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even call myself, I can play jazz, but I wouldn't call myself a jazz player by any stretch. If you listen to proper jazz players who do it for a living, I would never put myself in that category at all. But a student of mine, a guy I was teaching who'd moved from Chicago to Leeds, my hometown in the UK, just this kind of northern city in the UK, decided to move there for a job. And he brought some Greg Howe albums with him. And I was teaching him, and I'd listened to Greg Howe maybe in 1996 and learnt one solo from him and was blown away by it, but had just moved on. I was just consuming all sorts of stuff and didn't really, kind of get too into Greg Howe. And he brought, was it Hypercuity, I think it was, and Extraction, I think he brought those 2 rounds. I think Extraction had just come out, and man, that was it for me.
Yeah.
everything turned. I was like Mr. Pat Metheny up to that point. And this is weird because people don't normally do that. They normally go the other way.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah,
I've
from
grown
Greg
out of
Howe.
fusion now, and
Yeah.
now I'm going to get into Pat Metheny and Kurt Rosenwinkel and all these other guys. Well, I was still into those guys. I've never lost any of that. I'm a super huge Jonathan Kreisberg fan. I've been lucky enough to kind of hang out with him a little bit, and huge fan. But Greg Howe and Brett Garsed, Alan Hines, those guys completely changed my world and direction. At a point when you wouldn't think they would, I'd be too into the jazz thing. So up to that point, I wasn't doing any legato or anything. I will probably come into the legato thing later on, but at that point, my whole world changed and I got really into legato.
So how old were you at that time?
How old was I? 20, a little bit old actually, 24, 25.
Oh, so it means you practice those or, monster technique after that.
Yeah, so this stuff I started doing in about 2006.
Oh, so it's about...
So before that,
Yeah.
I was a little bit of a Pat Metheny clone. Don't get me wrong, I couldn't play like Pat Metheny.
Okay,
But I
okay.
wanted to be Pat Metheny.
Okay.
You know what it's like for guitar
Yeah,
players. You
yeah.
have all musicians, you have phases that you go through. So I had a Scott Henderson phase, I had an Alan Holdsworth phase, which failed miserably, as everybody does with Alan Holdsworth. So I had all these phases and then kind of got into the Greg Howe and Alan Hines thing, and Alan Hines in particular.
Yeah.
I remember having a really funny moment at NAMM in LA, where it was my first NAMM, and I was walking around like so excited about everything, and I saw him playing, and I think he must have thought I was the weirdest guy in the world because I just followed him around for about half an hour, like trying to hump his leg or something. It was just totally bizarre. The poor guy, but I just hero worshipped the guy. Here's me, 26, 27 years old, like should have grown out of that stuff and just couldn't believe that this guy could sound this way. So those guys completely changed the direction of my guitar playing. Back about 10 years ago now.
So it means you practice a lot of technique when you was like 20 something. So how do you practice it? Right.
Well, those two things together are really interesting because when I was 17, 16 and I was learning to play Dream Theater and Steve Vai stuff, I didn't have a teacher. And so my way of practicing technique was just to try and do it and watch videos because we had VHS tapes back then. And I would watch and watch and watch, and I would try and make my hand look like John Petrucci's hand and stuff. And it's not a good way to practice. And I would build tension into my playing where there shouldn't be tension. So now, consequently, like my picking is not that great. I can pick quite fast, but I have no control over it, and I can't improvise with it. I have no improvisational control with it. This is something I always talk about, improvisational levels of technique. Most people find they have sort of two levels of technique. You've got your predetermined level of technique, of things that you can play, that you've practiced and practiced and practiced. But if they were to change, you'd find the technique dropped significantly, or if you had to improvise with them. So I've always been conscious of my legato, or I don't know if I was conscious of it at the time, but I'm conscious of it now that I want it to be improvisational. So when I play legato, I don't want to be playing the same licks all over all the time. I do, of course, play muscle memory because obviously it's so fast you can't not. But so the difference now with the way I practice technique is I practice it so slowly that my brain is in control, not my fingers. So I always tell my students, work at the speed your brain wants to work at, not the speed your fingers want to work at, because these will wiggle a lot faster than your brain.
And become same every time, muscle memory.
Which is great if you just want the pure fundamental technique. If all you want to do is go and play the Under a Glass Moon solo, exactly like the record, that's what you need. You need that predetermined, very high level of technique. But if you want to be able to improvise and kind of make lines flow and play things that are more creative and play through chord changes, that's another thing that's more difficult. If your improvisational technique is not very high. To thread complex lines through chord changes is very difficult. So that's my process now, is to practice so slowly that my brain is always in control. And then the thing with legato technique is that it's not... my granddad always had this phrase, that thing that you're doing, it's like brute force and ignorance, and what he meant was it just requires lots of strength and not much kind of intelligence. And often, if you're just picking really, 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 really fast just to scale up and down, that's one thing, but to be able to improvise with it is completely different, and that requires a much slower process of building up your technique, but also your improvisational ability with the technique. It's all about slow, basically.
So the way you practice legato is like slow, try to control and try to turn what you're hearing in your head out.
So I can probably demonstrate. I mean, it's actually the most boring thing in the world to listen to. But I always do demonstrate it because guitar players have this thing, which I'm sure you know about, I certainly know about it, where if you say to a student, right, I want you to practice slowly, well, they'll do something like... It's like, that's not slow. This is
Yeah.
slow. And the thing, can you hear can you hear both things? Is that cool?
Yeah.
There's two things that are going on here. You should be able to do this so slowly that you are totally in control of every single note choice.
Yeah.
But the technique should be identical to when you're going to play fast.
Okay.
So sometimes when you ask people to play slowly and that you want them to improvise with a particular technique, they might, for instance, let's say they start here. I'm just in the key of G here. They might start, say, at this 4th fret, and they'll start really slow, and they'll put vibrato in, which is kind of makes sense because when you're playing slowly, you feel that the notes should be pretty.
Yeah.
But of course, when you speed up, you don't do any of that.
Yeah.
Everything's very static in terms of the hand position. So as you speed up, you've got no other nuances in there. It's just literally the technique. So if you can keep everything exactly the same as that when you play slowly, so the slow playing should be really, really slowly, very relaxed, very in control. Every single note choice is yours. And you're not doing anything different to what you would do if you're playing fast.
Yeah.
And therefore you'll find that after a while, this always sounds really disingenuous, but after a
Yeah.
while, you just have to do it faster.
Yeah.
But because the brain has developed the speed to be able to control
Yeah.
the note choices and the direction of the
Yeah.
line, it's not the fingers taking over.
Yeah.
They still will
Yeah.
do, as we talked about, the muscle
Yeah.
memory thing will kick in, especially when you play really, really fast.
Yeah.
What you'll find is you'll be able to do it through chord changes, you'll be able to change the direction of the line at will,
Yeah.
you'll be able to improvise new things that you've never played before, maybe more than you would if you didn't do this. You know, your hit rate of new things is possibly higher than if you didn't practice.
Yeah,
this
because
way.
you can control everything.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And you'll find that the technique, if you do it that way, you don't have loads of tension through the hand as you actually
Yeah.
practice, and you avoid kind of stamina issues and tendinitis and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
So it's just lots of slow practice.
Okay. And when I search your name on YouTube, there's 2 words always coming up after your name. It's legato, and the other one is hybrid picking. So we talk about legato already, and about hybrid picking. Hybrid picking?
Yeah, so the hybrid picking is, there's 2 reasons why I do hybrid picking. The first reason I did hybrid picking was for Greg Howe style intervallic lines. So you would always find that, again, because my picking sucks, this is a really simple example, but this highlights it perfectly. Again, if I stick with the key of G here, if I was going to play, say, this G at the 5th fret of the D string up to the A at the 7th fret, and then I wanted to grab now my octave G is here because of my weird tuning that I use that maybe we need to talk about in a minute. We'll have to remember to talk about that. But if you were going to grab the octave G, that would be the 8th fret of the B string, obviously. Now for me, it's the 7th fret here. Now if you were to pick that, let's say I went pick, hammer, pick. So I did. Now at that point, I've gone downstroke, hammer, and then an upstroke. Now that's fine because the hammer-on gives me time to get the pick up to the B string. But then and this is my weak picking technique. You'd probably be able to do this, no problem. I then have to bring the pick back over the G string, back to the D string, and that's where, for me, the time feel screws up. Just because my picking is not good enough, I don't have control over it. Whereas obviously if I do down, hammer, middle, and the way I do this is really important. I'll talk about this in a second when I talk about the other reason I do hybrid picking, is I pre-prepare this middle finger on the B string. So the lick would start like this. Now someone like Greg Howe would just move that top note around. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
We've all heard this kind of Greg Howe lines. So that kind of thing there, I'm going down, hammer, middle finger, and at that point the right hand is not moving at all. As in it's not moving up and down, it's just static.
It's fixed. Yeah.
So for me, that more efficient motion was much easier to execute. And I also like the sound that the middle finger has.
Yeah.
And that leads me on to the second reason. One of the things that I find with legato is, with legato, unlike when you pick, you get accents when you change strings.
Yeah.
Where you don't
because
want them.
you pick the string.
Because the picked sound is different to the legato sound, the hammer-ons and pull-offs. So if I was to play, and this is something I always talk about in masterclasses, so the guys who come tomorrow will hear all about this.
Yep.
If I play a 3-note per string scale, which if you come from a rock background like I did originally, that's how you learn scales, 3-note per string. Every time you transition, you get
accent.
So it kind of sounds, without all that delay on, it kind of sounds like a triplet. Okay. Now obviously if you pick, you can control that because you can accent the 4th note, if you play 16th notes, the 4th note of every group. So So that's fine, but with legato, I'm hybrid picking, I shouldn't be hybrid picking.
Yeah, you cannot accent the 16th note.
So that's a cool effect if you mean to do it.
Yeah.
If you play groups of 3
Yeah.
in 16th notes, but you mean to do it,
it's
a
the
really cool effect.
polyrhythm kind of thing, yeah.
But people don't mean to do it when they do it that way. So it's again a lack of control. Just like the improvisational technique thing, it's a lack of control that's the issue. So for me, the way I found around that totally by accident, by finding, just by practicing very slowly, I found that naturally my second finger was being used when I was transitioning. And I think it was an oral thing. Basically, as you use the second finger, because it's, I hate this word, flesh, because it's your fingertip, it's a similar sound. It's not the same, but it's a similar sound, a more similar sound to doing a hammer-on or a pull-off. So if you do it very lightly, those accents are much less implicit.
More smooth.
It's much smoother. And legato is all about smoothness. So as you speed that up, you don't get the... And the tone is better. Well, to my ears, the tone is better. It's not quite as fat, but it's more consistent. So that's why I like that technique. Now, the only downside is that as you come back this way, you can hybrid pick this way. I find it awkward. I find the whole hand starts to move in a way that I don't really like. So what I do on the way back is I will do very, very light brushed upstrokes. Okay. Now, that does change the sound slightly, but what you'll find is if you... some guys are probably familiar with rest strokes in classical playing. Where you'll take the first finger and you'll rest onto the string below. Now, if you take the same principle with the hybrid picking and with the picked notes, you get much softer sound. So again, like the pre-preparing of this lick, where the second finger is already underneath the B string before it's required. The way I start out here is I will start with the pick on the low E string, and I always pick the first note. Don't ask me why. I just do it softly. It just feels natural to pick the very first note. Okay. There's no reason for it.
But you can control it.
You can control it.
That's the part. Right?
I guess because it's the first thing that you do. Whereas when you do it as a string transition, it's a bit harder to control it. So I pick the first note, then do 2 hammer-ons, and before any of that's happened, my second finger is already underneath the A string. And then what's going to happen, I'll demonstrate this in a second, I don't know how well this will pick up on the camera, but I guess you'll be able to, you've got the perfect angle for it really, is every time I pluck to this new string, and actually I'm going to change my language there, not pluck, because pluck implies quite a hard sound. It's like a brush. It's a really light brush. And every time it's happened, immediately that finger moves to the new string. So it's very efficient technique. So you get this. Just that one more time. Now that's only applicable for playing that particular scale, but if you practice, like we talked before, where you do things very, very slowly, what you'll find is that starts to build into your playing naturally. It's almost like a game of chess. You start thinking 1 or 2 steps ahead, so your second finger pre-prepares for where you need to go, and you get this very, very smooth sound. So those lines, they're really smooth. That second finger just knows what it's supposed to do after a while.
And you playing on YouTube. At first, I was thinking that you sweep picking with the hybrid, with the middle finger, but it's not. You just move your hand down and just let the middle finger play the lower string.
So for a scale, obviously you just transition like this. Now, hopefully you're not playing too many scales as scales when you're improvising. So rather than, say I was going to take like an A minor 7 arpeggio, for instance, this is a good example of how the hybrid picking, for me, it's quite idiosyncratic and weird actually, but it's what's worked for me. And often you'll find, again, if we look at Pat Metheny, Steve Morse, you know, all these guys, they've got weird techniques that work for them. Because they've found what feels natural to them, and so they've developed their own style and sound. So if I was going to play an A minor 7 arpeggio, the most obvious way of playing that, and obvious can be very good sometimes, but it doesn't work for me, is to basically, so if I outline it this way, so I'm doing 2 notes on the lower string, 1 on the next, then 2, then 1, and then 2. This is a very common way of outlining arpeggios on the guitar these days, very common. So the most common way of playing that would be to go pick, hammer, then down, down, so sweep, like economy picking,
Yeah.
and then hammer, and then down, hammer.
Yeah.
Now, if I do that, I get this rushing kind of sound.
Yeah.
I'm not going to demonstrate it because it sounds horrible. But the way I would do it is I go down, hammer. Down, middle. And the reason that happens is because anytime I do more than one thing on a string,
Yeah.
a little bit like with the hybrid picking, like the Greg Howe thing we talked about, I've got time to move the pick to the next string without getting issues in timing or accented notes. So here, down, hammer, down, middle, hammer. Now that hammer, two things on that string allows me to transition the pick down to the G string. So pick and then hammer, middle.
Yeah.
Sorry, not hammer, middle. Middle, hammer, all the way around.
Yeah.
Now, weirdly, on the way back, it's all sweeping up strings.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think to everyone, this is one of very good example. You don't need to, you don't really need to fix your weak point, but you make your strong point become like your, ultimate weapon.
This is it. So you don't need to be amazing unless you go through government. You don't need to be amazing at everything.
Yeah.
You will find you just nailed it basically.
Yeah.
If you've got a weakness in something, try and find another way to do it
Yeah.
that is a different sound, and that will then become your thing.
Yeah.
Or it'll become one thing or a little part of you.
Yeah.
And more of those things will stack up to make you sound like you. Whereas if you worry, like I used to worry forever about my picking technique.
Yeah.
I used to sit for hours doing all those kinds of silly exercises. I used to sit and practice this. It's like, why am I doing
but it's
this?
not fun, right?
Like, I'm holding my breath, I'm tensing up, and I can't improvise with it. I can't. So in the end, the little bit of guitar player kind of obsession in me still wants to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And I've had those days where I've practiced it and thrown the pick at the wall and gone, oh, I can't do this.
Yeah.
I kind of have reached the point now where I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Because I found other ways of doing things. So, and if you look at, there's so many players who've developed incredible sounds that, like John Schofield's a great example. That guy can't pick for toffee, but he sounds amazing. Yeah. Absolutely. And he's the first guy to say on his own tuition video, I can't pick. But I can do this, and this sounds incredible. So, you've got to be okay with your weaknesses. You've got to be okay with them.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a little bit of your technique. And about when you learn new stuff, like new scale, new mode, chord, harmony stuff, what is your process to make it, really, to make yourself really understand it and be able to use it?
You have to have a context for everything where you can actually use it. Because there's a little bit of a guitar obsession thing, again, like the technique, where I have to learn everything. Yeah. But if you have no application for it, it goes in, and then a week later, it's been pushed out by something else. Because we all have a fairly limited capacity. Like, I have a daughter, she's 10 months old, and a family, and, I've got other things to do. I have to earn money as well, and I can't retain all this information just for the sake of retaining it. Yeah. And I am a harmony obsessive. I love harmony. Yeah. But you have to have a context for things. So I can give you an example. I, at one point, got really, really into, I listened to a lot of Ben Monder. I don't know if you know Ben Monder, but incredible jazz guitarist. I went and saw him play in New York, and he did a standards gig, and it totally blew my mind. And one of the things he was doing that was really cool is, I don't know if you know the tune Stella by Starlight? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so Stella by Starlight starts with an E-7 flat 5, and I apologise if this is getting too nerdy for people, but it's going to demonstrate a principle of utilising something in a real world context. Yeah, yeah. So it starts out with an E-7 flat 5, and goes to an A7 altered. Okay, now the very end of the tune cascades these down in tones. So then we get the same thing down a tone, D-7 flat 5 to G7 altered. Then the same thing from C to F. Okay, now he did this. And as soon as I heard that, it was like mind blown. I need to know what's going on here. Yeah. So I learned what he was doing, which is basically he was taking a sus chord shape, so a very consonant sound, and placing it against a bass note, the original bass note of the chord, and creating a very interesting sounding Locrian sound. And again, sorry guys if this is like, oh. Yeah. Now you can do exactly the same thing for the altered chord because it's only one note different from the Locrian scale. Okay, the fourth is different. Yeah. So there's all of these really interesting. These are all altered chords. And and then do the same. And then this is something slightly different, but so once I'd learned that and I'd figured out what it was, okay, it's a new sound. I then started putting it into every jazz standard I knew. Now you shouldn't always, you don't go and do jazz gigs and play this harmony. But if you've got a context for it, so you've got somewhere you can actually physically apply it, not just something like I learnt the augmented scale. And it's really, really cool, but I get to use it so rarely that my vocabulary with it is not that good because I just don't get to use it. Now, at some point, I should sit down and actually properly learn some vocabulary for it. But this is just an example of something that you can do that, so long as you have an application for it and you can use it in a real world, everyday context, if your gig requires it, then you can do that. And you know, this was a really nice one that I kind of stole. So it's all about having an application for things and not just knowing something for the sake of it and then never using it again. You know. So that's kind of the way I would approach things.
Okay. And when you play solo on a fusion style, there's a lot of like outside chromatic stuff. How at first when we try to learn those stuff, it starts with weird. So how to make yourself get into that thing?
So you've got to think like a drummer at first. Now you can move away from this as quickly as you want to, but in order to train your ears, let's have a think about what a drummer does. So a drummer will play a static drum groove usually for 3, 7, however many bars, and then the 4th or the 8th bar or the 16th bar, well, what will they do? They'll play a drum fill. And the purpose of the drum fill is to create tension that then resolves rhythmically back onto beat 1 of the new bar, or the new section, the new 4, 8, 16, whatever bar section, or 12 if it's a blues. Now, if you think the same way, what you can do is, if you set up a groove, just a single chord groove. I wonder if I can use the looper here to do this. You might want to cut some of this out as I record a loop. So if you've got a groove that lasts, say, you think of it as a 4-bar groove. In that 4th bar where the drum fill would be, and we can all hear where a drum fill should go, you can literally play anything. So long as on beat 1 of the new bar you resolve properly. Okay, now, if you say to somebody, you can play anything, it's too much choice. It's like looking at the menu of an incredible restaurant and having no idea what to pick because everything's too good. Okay. So the really obvious one is the one that everybody teaches, which is to go up a semitone and then come back down again. But you can literally play anything you want. The key really is rhythmically, this is a rhythmic exercise, is to resolve back to beat 1 on the following 4-bar section. Okay, so a little phrase that's quite useful to take, if you take the top section of an A minor pentatonic scale, so I mean A minor here, A Dorian. Okay, so I'm going to play this phrase. Okay, now this is quite cool because it's kind of keyboard-like sounding anyway. It doesn't sound like your classic kind of...
it's not sound bluesy.
Exactly, so... Okay, so that little phrase, which is basically for the guys who are in standard tuning, which will be 99.9% of you, is the 8th fret on the E string, the 5th fret on the E, the 8th fret on the B, and then the 7th and 5th frets on the G.
Okay, let me break a little bit. So what is your tuning?
So yes, that's a good point. My tuning is, for my top 2 strings, I have a C and an F.
Okay.
So they're up a semitone. It just makes the guitar more symmetrical. It removes that weird major third between I say weird, that's how guitars tune, but between the G and the B string.
It's same as Alex Hutchinson?
Yes.
Yeah,
same. Exactly the same. Must be a British thing. I don't know. Although we all stole it from Stanley Jordan, who's an
I see.
jazz guitar player.
So everyone understand easier what you're playing, why it sounds like that.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you just take this phrase, in that, to demonstrate this really, really clearly, I'm going to repeat that phrase over and over again. In the 4th bar, I'll shift up, then I'll shift back down again, and then I'll do something a little bit different. So here's the loop. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to count out 4 bars. So there's bar 2, bar 3, and bar 4 is the one we want to play out. So if we've got... So you can hear in that 4th bar, I just literally I just played an A-flat Mixolydian scale. nothing complex at all.
Yeah.
Sometimes in workshops, I'll get students to pick a scale.
Yeah.
And they always pick something like the weirdest sounding thing they can think of.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really matter actually, so long as it is distinctly different from the scale that you were on originally. If you went from from A Dorian to A Aeolian, you're not changing enough to actually
the tonal
get the
still same. Right.
Which is why the semitone shift is a good idea. Although, like everything else, you'll find if you just do the semitone shift up and back down again, you get bored with it very quickly.
Yeah.
There's a world of stuff there, but you will get bored with it very quickly.
But that's a good starting point.
It's an amazing starting point. Because especially with minor pentatonic, it's such a familiar shape. You can move up and then back down again.
Yeah.
So the key is to do that in the fourth bar and then come back down again. And that semitone thing is nice because it's so easy to resolve.
Yeah.
So it's a great starting point. And to answer your point, that's a really good training for your ears. And once your ears are into that sound, then you start to accept more dissonance and more kind of interesting ideas, basically.
Right. And in your improvisation, in your solo, I heard that there you create a tension and then release, but on the tension thing, you create from both a harmony stuff, like the half tone shift, and on the rhythmic also, right?
Yeah, I guess
it's like the subdivision of the note you play.
I think partly there's two things to that. So I shift subdivisions. I don't actually play really complex subdivision-based material because with legato it's actually quite difficult to do. It's more of a picking thing. But I do shift subdivisions within the lines, so that helps a bit. And then the other thing I think that is a little bit, for some reason, and I guess it's because of the way guitar generally is played, I think just the fact that I am sticking to very specific subdivisions with the legato in of itself is unusual enough, because a lot of legato is kind of that Satriani-esque kind of, I can't even do it. Very liquidy kind of sound, whereas mine is more da-ga-da-ga-da-ga-da-ga-da-ga-da-ga-da. And then switching between the subdivisions will give you naturally some of that tension as you move between those subdivisions. So possibly that's what it is. I've got to be honest, I never really thought of it too much. So if you're hearing that, maybe you have a better idea than me, I'm not sure. But that's what I can think of. It's maybe switching between those subdivisions, and also the fact that it is very strict in terms of the rhythmic subdivision within the lines, legato lines. So maybe that's adding some interest that wouldn't be there otherwise.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess.
Yeah. And all those stuff, I found that you have a DVD lesson to be able to buy or download from your website, right? Can you talk more about this?
Actually, there's quite a lot of them. So I've done a whole three-part legato tutorials. Modern legato, I've called them, which is maybe a little bit grand, but I guess it is the modern way of doing legato. Modern legato 1, 2, and 3. Part 1 goes through this whole thing to do with timing and ways of practicing it. And there's a practice session that's 45 minutes long that you can get as well. That's like a guided practice session, a little bit like Frank Gambale's Chop Builder, but without the pom-pom girls. And then part 2 goes through the same thing, but with triplet-based subdivisions. And then part 3 is all about line construction, some of which we'll get into with the guys tomorrow. But ways of constructing lines that aren't just based around scales with specifically legato. But there's loads of tutorials on there. There's a jazz harmony tutorial, diminished scale, a big melodic minor one that's been very popular to do with the function. People misunderstand melodic minor a lot of the time. The way each chord functions and each mode functions, so that's on there as well. I've even got video production tutorials now, which you guys don't need, obviously. But there's loads of stuff on there. So I mean, if you guys want to check it out, they can go to tomquayle.co.uk.
Okay, for your website.
There's all sorts on there.
Okay, and you're also one of the famous jamming, improvising guitarists these days, especially on YouTube.
Cool.
So when you got a new song, like a new tune, you want to play, you want to learn, and you want to jam it, what is your process?
I have the world's worst memory for tunes, and I am not even kidding. I have a horrible memory for tunes. So these days, the way I learn tunes is by, again, I take the same process I do with my technique. So I will play through them so slowly that my brain is in control. The only way I can do it, so if we're talking tunes where, like a standard for instance, rather than learning someone else's tune or one of my tunes that I just physically have to play, more like a predetermined solo for instance, the only way I can do it is to literally sit down and improvise through it over and over and over again until I can just play lines through it without, the changes just flag up automatically. because I have over the years, and you know, I would say to people, be a little bit careful of this kind of stuff, because I've developed a little bit of a psychological thing with forgetting changes as I'm playing. And it's just developed over the years by having a few bad experiences where I've forgotten changes where I shouldn't really have forgotten changes. And it doesn't happen so much now because I've changed my process. But it used to happen all the time. And again, it's kind of like just allowing myself. So if I was going to play through something like Autumn Leaves, for instance, my process might be, rather than, I'm not going to play. I'm not going to do that because. That's going to give me physical grips, and it's going to. I can learn the chord changes that way, but improvisationally, it's a different thing to improvise through. So I'm going to very slowly sit and kind of. Now that's not a hard tune. But I would do that with other tunes, so I might do that. I did that with Falling Grace for a long time. Much more complex tunes. And I'm just playing constant streams of eighth notes very slowly through them so that the changes flag up in my brain. And then when I want to play music, I don't have the issue of trying to remember what the changes are. They're just there immediately. And actually that's quite therapeutic practice because it sounds beautiful at the same time. It sounds like Bach. So it doesn't sound like Bach, but it's kind of
the same way.
It's the same principle.
That way.
You know? Exactly. If it sounded like Bach, I'd be much happier. You know, it's not quite there.
But there's not a lot of jazzy chord in Bach music.
No, that's very true. That's very true. Absolutely.
Okay. And you jam a lot. How to make yourself fresh all the time?
Rhythmic vocabulary. I think that's the key. Good time feel and rhythmic vocabulary. Like I jammed with, do you know Josh Smith?
Not really.
Incredible blues player. Josh is incredible. Josh doesn't play harmonically complex things all the time. He can, but he doesn't play harmonically complex things. And I know I've been kind of guilty of trying to play the most complex harmonically complex thing I can think of. To kind of maybe substitute for the fact that my ideas weren't interesting enough in the first place. Kind of, you know, so being rhythmically interesting and having a really wide rhythmic vocabulary and having control of your time feel, you can get away with playing very limited material and sound really interesting over and over and over again. And it's really fun to work on as well. And you don't have to remember loads and loads and loads of scales and chords and all sorts of things, you know. So time feel, number one. The number of guitar players I've jammed with whose time feel is just all over the shop, and you can't play anything when that's happening. And then, you know, just really getting to grips with some rhythmic vocabulary. And there's loads of ways you can do that, loads and loads of ways.
Okay, and let's talk about your gear. Right.
We always want to talk about gear.
Can you tell more about the guitar you use? You have signature, right? This one is also your signature. So the signature thing is a little bit loose with it's not loose with Fibonacci. I've got 8 signature models. But then what they are really is guitars they've made for me that have got my logo on. That they've spec'd out for me because of a particular thing that they've been working on or that I've wanted. So you can order all of these as Tom Quayle signature models, but they're Fibonacci guitars with my logo on. And they're all amazing. So this particular one is their model that's called the Erotic, for fairly obvious reasons. And it's everything on the guitar is handmade, literally everything except for the tuning pegs. They make everything. So stainless steel frets, maple neck, brass nut, which is interesting. That's unusual. That makes the open strings sound like fretted notes, which some people will hate. I think it's great. Like it.
I really like it. We've got Fibonacci hand-wound pickups, so humbucker and 2 single coils. The humbucker can be split series or parallel within the coils, so you can have noiseless single coils as well. Their own trem, which is a 2-point floating trem, which works really well.
What is the body wood? The
body is alder, and it's hand painted in oils by a guy called Oliver Sin, who's an incredible artist from Hungary, from Budapest. And this is based on the German physicist Gauss.
And
so that's kind of cool.
And other models, you have the same spec, like body, outer body?
Some of them are older bodies. The single cuts are mahogany. I also have a Carina hollow body guitar, which is it's a thin line, small hollow body guitar. So that's my jazz guitar.
Yeah.
That's incredible. The only problem with Carina is it's so soft that when you tune, you can take chunks of the wood out. This is not a Fibonacci issue. This is just Carina.
Yeah.
You can tune, your thumb just takes a load of wood out, so that could be a bit of an issue. But it sings like crazy. It resonates so well.
Right.
So those are the guitars. As far as amps go, I'm using Laney, so GH50R, and the Lionheart. This is actually what I use for all my stuff. Absolutely killer. Primarily actually because it's got two different speakers. There's the Vintage 30 and the...
it's like a blend.
I'm trying to remember what the other one is. A G1265. It might be a G1265H. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But you get that blend. And because it's closed back, it's got... or it's semi-closed back. It's got this really big kick to the bottom end. And it's just a fantastic sounding thing. Just usually... So I just literally plug my pedal board straight into that. And I use
normally you use the clean amp.
Almost exclusively.
Yeah.
Very occasionally I use the drive.
Yeah.
But the reason I very rarely use it is because of this down here, actually.
Yeah.
Because I also use this, which is... This is like a sales advert, sales pitch now. But this is incredible. This is the Wampler Dual Fusion.
Yeah. It's your signature.
Yeah, this is the signature drive pedal they made for me, and it's a 2-channel drive. But what was unusual about it at the time, a couple of people have copied it now, is that there's actually 2 sets of ins and 2 sets of outs. And the idea is you can use these, the 2 sides of it in different ways. You can either just use side 1 or just use side 2. Not sure why you'd want to do that, but actually there is a reason, which I'll go into in a second.
Yeah.
Or you can go into 1 and out of 2, and thereby stack 1 into 2.
Okay.
Or you can go into 2 and out of 1, and thereby stack 2 into 1.
Yeah.
Or you could even, because of the dual outs, you could go into 1, out of 1, then into a flanger.
Yeah.
If you wanted to,
and
then into 2 and out of 2. So you could put something in between, them.
So you can do a full cable method with the effect pedals.
Absolutely. Actually, the reason why this came about is because I use a G2 looping system made by Daniel.
You can separate it into a loop.
Exactly. Yeah. So a single foot switch will allow you to select either side or both stacked together, whatever you need, basically. So that's why that came about. It did confuse a few people originally when they were wiring one out of, into 1 and out of 1 and going, why is number 2 not working? But it's just incredible sound. Brian is a genius, and this sounds just like an amazing tube amp. It's insane, and having this level of versatility from a single drive pedal is in this form factor as well. They've actually rotated it round now and redesigned it slightly. The one that I've got that's actually designed that way is on my pedal board, and I've pulled it off so many times the pedal tape is falling to bits. So I don't want to, because I'm scared I'm going to pick it up one day, it's just going to fall off and smash to bits. But this is the slightly older one, but they sound exactly the same. Yeah. It's incredible, absolutely amazing. Yeah. So that's it. So I use this and some of the Wampler pedals. I've got the Strymon stuff. Yeah. I use fractal audio gear, especially for recording as well, because that's so convenient for recording. Because I think we're going to talk a little bit about projects and stuff, and so I'll tell you a little bit about
what string case you use.
Okay, so I use 10 to 46 on this scale length. Okay. Where you've got either a 24 fret guitar, or if you've got a 22, which is like a Strat style scale. On my single cut Les Paul style or on jazz guitars, I use 11 to 52. Okay. But I'm thinking about maybe changing things up a little bit, because the tension that you get on this string in particular from tuning in fourths like this one with an F is just a little bit uncomfortable for this scale length. It's fine for the shorter one, so we'll see. Someone told me to do 9.5s.
Yeah, mixed. Right, or like thinner top.
Yeah, like a hybrid set.
Yeah.
So
and
we'll see.
What brand you use the string?
These are IQS strings, and they're handmade Italian strings, and they're really good, really good strings, and they support me. So they're really nice guys. So
okay. Last one. What is the most important thing that you think guitarists should pay attention to, but they are not? They're always forgot.
Oh man, that is a really good and tough question. I think I might refer back to a previous answer, which is time feel over technique every time. Time feel, well, not just over technique, but time feel over technique and knowledge every time. Because I think we'd all agree we'd rather listen to somebody with really great time playing something that grooves really hard than somebody who can play, ridiculous sets of changes super fast, but the time is not that great. It's like Jerry Bergonzi, a really great sax player, always says time is king. Yeah. So if you're going to work on one thing, work on your time. Yeah. And I'm as guilty as everybody else, by the way. Yeah. I need to work on mine more as well. So.
Yeah. Okay, last one. Any words for your Thai fan?
Guys, thank you so much for all your support. I would love to come out and see you guys more often, and good luck with your guitar playing. I hear so much killer stuff from over here, so thanks for everything. I hope to see you guys again soon.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you for your time.
Awesome. Great
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cheers.
ครับผมก็สำหรับโอกาสดีๆอย่างนี้นะครับต้องขอบคุณบริษัทสยามดนตรียามาฮ่าแล้วก็เลนนี่แอมนะครับที่จัดอีเวนต์เวิร์กช็อปดีๆแบบนี้นะครับแล้วก็ทำให้เราได้มีโอกาสพูดคุยกับศิลปินระดับโลกนะครับหวังว่าทุกคนก็ได้เรียนรู้อะไรกันบ้างนะครับแล้วเดี๋ยวรอดูกันว่าเทปหน้ากีตาร์ไทยพาทุกท่านไปคุยกับใครนะครับวันนี้ผมลาไปก่อนนะครับสวัสดีครับ